Hello, friends. Welcome aboard the Round Trip Stories podcast, where we share stories of moving around the world and back again, reflecting on the lessons we've learned along the way. My name is Tracy.
And my name is Melissa, and we are so glad you're joining us for today's episode. Our guest today is Tracy Vilanova, international educator, mom of 3 boys, and global history buff who lived and worked in China for 8 years. Tracy and her young family moved from California to Beijing and then to Wuhan to work in international schools. They loved learning about the world through their Chinese and international colleagues and friends there, even through the culture shocks which came from surprising places. Even through the challenges of marriage, parenthood, work, and depression, she still loved learning about global history and current events from her place in China. So buckle your seatbelts and make sure your tray tables and seats are in their upright positions as part 1 of Tracy's round trip story gets ready for takeoff. Tracy, thank you so much for being willing to share your stories. Welcome to the Round Trip Stories podcast, which, of course, you are one of the hosts of.
Yes, I'm so happy to start this with you, Melissa.
Yes, so today you get to be guest number 1 and share your stories with me and with our listeners. And I'm sure that no matter how many of your stories I've heard, that there are going to be some new things I hear today that I have never heard before. And I am excited about that. Just tell us, who are you and who are your people? Where did you start and where did you go and when and all of that?
All those things. Okay, so who am I? I am from the Central Valley of California, and my husband Manuel is from El Salvador, and he moved to the San Francisco Bay Area at 16 years old. But he'd also lived in Costa Rica for several years during El Salvador's Civil War. There he attended a British school, and back in El Salvador he attended a German school. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because that's a part of our story. The international schools are a part of our story. I spent a semester in college studying abroad in Spain, and then 2 years in Mexico in grad school. And so we were both bilingual in Spanish and English. My husband was trilingual in German. It's back there still somewhere. And and we highly value global perspectives. And I'm a bilingual teacher, and he has worked in building management, and we have 3 sons. So,
okay.
And where did we start and where did we go? So that's where we started, and then we ended up in Beijing, China for 4 years, and then we were in Wuhan, China for 4 years. We were there between 2009 and 2017, and it was during the global recession. And then we came back to California several years before the pandemic.
Okay, got it. And how old were your boys? When and where were your children born?
So most of my kids, all my kids were born in the United States, actually. And
okay.
The first 2 were 18 months and 3 years old when we moved to Beijing. And then my last one was I came home for a summer to have him, but he was designed and assembled in China.
Nice.
So
awesome.
You asked the question, why did we go to China? And we had wanted to go to China to better understand our global neighbor in general, and learning Mandarin Chinese was important to me, and I wanted to give that gift to my kids, and they were, toddlers at the time, and so that was like the optimal time to learn another language. My background is linguistics, and so I'm really into learning languages and all that. And I know that up to 7 years old children are like geniuses when it comes to learning languages. And actually in 2003, I tried to go to China, but I could not because of SARS, another pandemic, severe acute respiratory syndrome. But the advantage was that Manuel and I got married that year. So I didn't go to China, but I got married.
Okay.
So that was a good trade-off.
Yes. So what did you do while you were living there?
Okay. We worked at international curriculum in international schools. The first school we worked for in the outskirts of Beijing was a Chinese-run private bilingual school for Chinese families. And half the staff was foreign and half the staff was Chinese. And so 70% of our day was in English and with an American curriculum. And so these are all private school Chinese and Korean kids learning 70% of their day in English. And their families are wanting them to go overseas to an English-speaking country, either for high school or for college. And so they are making that decision really early on to send their kids to these international curriculum schools. Our second school in Wuhan was a Western-run Christian school for foreign children whose families were living and working in China. And it could be Christian openly because they served foreign passport holders only. So they weren't technically working with the Chinese. They were working with the foreigners.
Got it. Oh, interesting. Okay, so let's get to the stories.
The stories.
Yes. So we know that there are always more things to share than we will ever have time for. But tell us a story about your initial transition or adjustment to living in China.
So I chose a story, kind of an analogy, and it reminded me of actually something in Beijing that we had to do. Like, we had to bundle up our toddlers in the winter because it's super cold and windy, icy wind in Beijing. It means North Capital, so it's in the north of China. And I felt like a bundled up toddler because when you see a bundled up toddler, you've got the big, like, one-piece snowsuit, right? You've got the boots, you've got the beanie, you've got a scarf that goes around their nose and their mouth, and you can only see their eyes. Of course, they've got gloves on too. And so I kind of felt like, and they walk stiffly, right? They kind of toddle around. And so they're not, you can't really see who they are. They can't run. You can only see their eyes. They can't really talk very well. And so I kind of felt like, our initial transition is like us being a bundled up toddler, right? People can only see our eyes. They can't really understand us very well. We can't really walk. We're just clumsy.
Yeah.
And so, so here's some of the layers. So, they have hand signals for numbers on one hand. Like, we can count to 10 on 10 of our fingers. But in China, once you get to 5, then you keep on the same hand and there's different hand signals from 6 through 10. And so we learned how to say those, and which was really exciting. And we also learned how to say like a couple words. And so I feel like once we had some of those basic words or signals, then we could actually like pay for electricity on our own and water on our own. And so I kind of felt like, that was like taking our scarf off, right? So like people can start to understand us. They can kind of start to see our face and like we're starting to see who we really are. Then when we had a little extra money saved up because we had like been working for a while, we could buy additional plates, like, dinner plates and silverware and cups. And so that we could actually have like people over, because we had more than 4 plates. And that was really good for my heart because I love having people over. And so that was like taking my gloves off, right? So like my hands were free to serve people, which I couldn't really do before that. And so just in time for Christmas, we bought a mini oven. So most Chinese cooking is done on stovetop. So ovens are not super common in apartments.
Right.
And I could bake. Now, I could only bake like 6 cookies at a time or 6 muffins at a time, but I could. And all those smells that come with that too.
Yes.
So, so I felt like, I'm like becoming more myself, even like culinarily, right? Like, so it was kind of like taking my hat off so people can like see my face and still getting to know me, who I am. We found an international church and we figured out the right bus to get there and we began to make friends. And that was just like, just made our heart happy. It was like, we're kind of taking the stiffness of our jacket off. So we're getting more coordination, right? Let's see what else. And also after we had like the longest winter, that first winter, it started November 1st, it started snowing and it wasn't done until spring comes in about April. And so, and with the spring come the blossoms. And being from the Central Valley, we have a lot of blossoms around here because of fruit trees. And it just made me feel like home, and like there's just something about spring that makes you feel renewed. And so when I saw that, it was so good for my mental health. And I felt like that was like a sweater coming off, right? So like I wasn't as stiff anymore. People were kind of getting to see the form of who I really was. And we made our first trip out of town in the spring, and we really enjoy exploring. And so the fact that we could do that made us feel like more like us, and so that was kind of like, okay, we're going to put shorts on instead of having our big snowsuit on, right? And the seasons were getting warmer. And so not only were we feeling less stiff and weren't bogged down with all these layers, but people could see who we were too. All those bulky winter layers came off, and we felt like ourselves again. And we could walk and talk normally, and it just took time, right? All those layers of adjustment came off, just like it comes off when you unwrap your toddler in the winter. So that's my story about initial adjustment. Not easy.
Yes. So tell us next, what's a story that you have about something that was hard during your adjustment or time living abroad?
Right. There are always lots of hard things. There are lots of exciting things, and there are lots of hard things. And one of my story is about when we moved to Wuhan, actually. So 4 years we were in Beijing, and then we moved to Wuhan. And even though the transition wasn't as difficult, but there was just something that happened around year 6. And it was... I became situationally depressed, and there was a lot of things that, kind of snowballed. And so here's the story. Our company we worked for often gave a sabbatical year, the 6th year. And we had just joined that company, so I didn't qualify for the 6-year sabbatical, but I was 6 years in China. So, and there's something about it. So there was a convergence of life situations that had less to do with China per se and more to do with my life stage, my professional identity, my motherhood, and major construction happening outside my apartment. So first, my littlest son was now in half-day preschool, and for the first time in 10 years, I was not changing diapers. So that's a big deal, right? I mean, it's a big life stage to come out to. So I was kind of coming out of my early childhood motherhood stage. And I looked around and I realized that, wow, we had great day-to-day living, but we were not really planning for the future. And that made me question if we were still in the right spot, right? We were still in the right country, city, apartment, marriage, and plus my washer was breaking and I could only wash 3 boy jeans at a time. And that was driving me crazy. So second, So second, I missed nature. Beijing is a city of 20 plus million. Wuhan is a city of over 10 million. And there's a lot of concrete and building and glass that goes along with that. And I wasn't getting enough of nature in the urbanity. And so at the time, Wuhan was doing this complete facelift. Like there were cranes everywhere, and they were building an overhead highway about 50 yards from my house, and the subway stop about 50 yards from my house. And it was just this din of construction for like 2 years, and it was weighing on me. And they were making better infrastructure, and they were making great commercial mega spaces and apartment buildings, but it was all happening right outside of my apartment. So it was rough. And I was feeling a little bit of a culture shock with my employer. And this is when culture shock. They were the Western employers, and so it's just that how every organization has a culture, and I believed in what they were doing and respected how they ran the school. And they were amazing, and their mission is amazing. And I love the opportunities we were given through the school. But I was beginning to feel a little boxed in by some of the traditional views that our employer had, and especially as a woman. And so I just wasn't used to that. And I was, and I was coming out of this early childhood motherhood stage, and I had a lot of professional experiences before I became a mom. And so I just kind of felt like people looked at me like just a mom, or like a 28-year-old, when really I'm a 38-year-old with lots of life experience. Anyways, and my husband's contract was coming up, and I actually didn't want to stay in China anymore, but he did. And so there was some conflict there, right? And like I said, I was feeling a little depressed. And because my husband and I weren't on the same page, and I felt like I didn't know what to do. I felt out of control, And so at one point I even considered taking my kids and just leaving and going back to the United States by myself. I mean, to be completely honest, that was a couple weeks during that time.
Sure.
I became grumpy and impatient, but fortunately we had an international doctor who helped me see that I was situationally depressed. Like it could be labeled, and I can see, and then I started to see a counselor back in Beijing through Skype at the time. And they all helped me to understand that I was not crazy or mean, but that in my same situation or season, others would likely feel depressed like I was. Yeah. And that just made me feel so validated that I heard that from professionals. And we really need other people like that to support us and to help us to understand the big picture.
Yes.
And I learned that depression can be a catalyst to make some changes. And that's what we did. So instead of me leaving town, we decided, Manuel, my husband and I decided that, okay, we need to actually move to a quieter, more modern apartment with a larger washer. So I wasn't micromanaging my small washer. And we strategically planned once a month outings to parks. So that was very helpful. And I knew that there was an end point too, because even though we didn't want to leave, even though I agreed not to leave at that point, I knew that 2 more years and then we would leave. And so it was kind of like, gave us time to enjoy those 2 years and to make the most of them. And they actually ended up being the most fruitful.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear a story about something or someone or someplace that you loved.
Definitely. We loved a lot. And I guess what I love and continue to love the most is how China gave me a perspective on the past and present in global history. So when we moved, we didn't just meet Chinese people, right? We met people from all over the world because people are living and doing business in China. And that was just very exciting. And so as far as global history goes, like I'll give the example of Wuhan, right? Of course, everybody knows where Wuhan is now, but people knew where Wuhan was a long time ago too. And in the last couple months that we were there, I got to run a half marathon, and it was neat because it took us through the streets of Wuhan, and actually, it takes you through history. And so I'm going to tell you about my half marathon route, and so then you can get a perspective on how China is just like this, has so much global history. So, and by the way, by the time this marathon was going on, I could actually use those brand new subways to get to where I was going all by myself.
Oh,
and that was
the ones that you had to listen to.
Yeah, it was very empowering. Okay, so
cool.
The starting line was in Wuhan's Bund. And you might have heard the phrase Bund when we talk about Shanghai. There's this like whole strip along the river of all these foreign buildings like built in the early 1900s, late 1800s. And they were trading houses and banks from like Japan and Germany and England and France, because all those countries wanted business in China. And so that was kind of the same thing that happened in Wuhan, because Wuhan is also along a river. And so that's where it started. And so there were foreign banks and trading houses from Germany, Russia, Japan, the United States, and Great Britain set up in these really old gray stone European buildings from the late 16th century. We actually gathered at the 1922 Hanko Customs House where the starting buzzard blared. And I mean, this mass of people, all of us were wearing yellow shirts, just kind of like started like moving slowly through the streets of this old concession area. And we were kind of like a yellow lion New Year's dragon going through the streets, if you can picture that. We were kind of bobbing up and down and zigzagging. And so through the former foreign concessions that are now reclaimed by the Chinese banks and businesses. So I jogged with everyone and always encouraged by those around me. And that's one of the things I love about races, is that people, like here in the United States, they use cowbells to encourage people to keep, to go and to run, keep running. But there we had these groups of retired women, and one of the things I love, oh gosh, I'm going to tell you all these things, but there in each neighborhood, there seems to be like this more like plaza area, and then a lot of retired women and sometimes men will gather to dance or to like do group exercises, often to music.
Oh, yeah.
And I always loved that. And sometimes they would be like, they would have instruments, or they would practice, and there would be group instruments to play at different parties. But those ladies were on the sidelines cheering for us with their drums and with their cymbals. And I was just like, oh, that just encouraged me so much. Yeah. And they also, there were young people yelling for us too. They're yelling, "Jayo, jayo," which means put in oil, like, like a car, you got to put in oil to
like
make
step
it go.
on the gas.
Yeah, like go, yeah, exactly. And so I felt so encouraged, right? And I think that like on a global theme, everybody encourages each other, like no matter where you're from. It's always nice to have encouragement.
Yes.
So then, actually, in someday I want to be an old dancing lady, perhaps with a drum, who encourages others along their marathon of life. They were so encouraging.
That.
So then I left the concessions and I jogged up an on-ramp out of the old European quarter and onto the famed 2-storied Yangtze River Bridge. So it was the first bridge that was built across the river before they would just go by boats to get from one side to the other.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a road, and it's on top of train tracks. And this was first built in the 1950s, and it was completed with the help of the Russians. So in that era of history, Russia and China are both communists and helping and industrializing and things. So that was neat. So I'm like crossing a bridge from the 1950s that really represents the Soviet-China partnership and era.
Yeah.
So that bridge connects a hill called Turtle Hill on the north bank of the river, and then to Snake Hill on the south side. And Snake Hill has this iconic yellow crane tower. And it comes from an ancient poem from 220 AD. And it's actually, that's when they first constructed it, but it's a subject of a 6th century poem. And so it's just like, there's just so much history there, right?
A
lot more history than perhaps many of our listeners are used to. Like in the United States, we're a really pretty young country, right? And so we don't have a whole lot of these structures that are from so long ago. So then I ran past streets with more 1900s era buildings and a huge modern museum commemorating the Wuchang Uprising. And that was the first successful uprising against imperialism in 1911. And there was a statue of the revolutionary leader, Sun Yat-sen, the first president of the new Republic of China.
Yeah.
And so down the street from that is an old Catholic church, and where we once attended Mass with foreigners from Africa, India, Europe, and Asia. There are a lot of international people who go to universities in Wuhan. And so and the Mass was given in French by an Irish priest.
Oh, wow.
It seemed like when we went to that church, it was like all humankind was represented there.
Yeah.
That was like modern times, right? So there's this international side to Wuhan in its modernity. So then I jogged back to the south side of the Yangtze River and their ancient and 20th century history. that gave way to 21st modernity, where like tall, shiny buildings sprout up on all sides. There were international hotel chains like Hilton and Sheraton mixed in with luxury and middle-level Chinese brand hotels and businesses. On that side of the river, there were large universities. And like I said, thousands of foreign students and tens of thousands of Chinese national university students attended there. And it's the largest Chinese university population in China. And there was also a shiny mall and walking streets that it began on one side with a 5D movie theater whose outside architecture kind of resembled like a golden Frank Gehry edifice. And the mall ended into a building with which was like a giant red lantern designed by a British architect. And inside it housed the Han Show. It was amazing. So, and their international acrobats performed an avant-garde show with stadium seating for 4,000 guests and a stage which retreats. It kind of backs up and moves. And then there's like a 10-meter pool beneath. It was amazing. Oh, wow. So modern. So the acrobats dive in and never come up because there's like an exit somewhere below the water.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So much better than a Beijing tourist acrobatic show. This thing was like amazing.
Yeah.
So this half marathon took me through the history of Wuhan, and I feel like it was like a microcosm of the history of China because we saw ancient temples and walking streets, 1800s era foreign occupation buildings, Chinese revolutionary monuments, architectural feats, 21st century places of worship, and cutting edge edifices of technology, commerce, and entertainment. And China is all of these things, and it's not isolated, right? Because as I talked about, like people from all over were coming into China starting into the 1800s in this area and still are in Wuhan in particular, but in China broadly. So I just really appreciated that, like I said, it gave me this more of like a deeper history and a broader global perspective on history. I loved it.
So before we finish up this first part of your round trip story, is there anything that you learned about yourself or people or the world by living abroad or during your time living abroad that you would like to share with us?
One of the main things that I learned was that borders are very fuzzy, right? Like on our maps, they might be strong black lines, but people come and go. And I just really appreciated what people were so open to sharing about their countries. And I think that I realized how small the world is and how fluid borders are. And that people go in and out, and we met people in China who had houses on the west coast of the United States who would go back and forth. There's just so much more overlap than I knew before, right? And there's so much more overlap in global history than I realized before. I love the perspective that living there gave me, and I'm so thankful for it.
Well, thank you, Tracy, for sharing all these stories. I can't wait to hear the next part of your story.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Thank you, Tracy, for sharing your round trip stories from Beijing and Wuhan, China. You wanted to understand your global neighbor, and like a bundled Beijing toddler in the summer, your layers of adjustment came off, and you operated in new ways in a new place. Even through the craziness of raising toddlers and going through some depression, you cherished learning about global current events and history as an international educator in China. We really appreciate you sharing your stories with us. So what happened when Tracy returned to California? You'll have to make that return trip to our podcast for part 2 of Tracy's round trip story to find out. Want the podcast equivalent of early boarding and first class seating? Be sure to subscribe to this podcast in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed this podcast, would you consider sharing it with your fellow globetrotting friends? We would love to encourage them too.
As this episode lands, we hope these stories have encouraged you, help you find some more of your belongings, and made your baggage a little lighter.
Thanks so much for listening, friends. We'll see you next time.